the analog feel of these cars, especially in this digital age, electric age. I think, you really, it always puts a smile on your face there. So, and I think maybe that's what's driving demand also.
Easily 50% as of now.
Of all classics are Mercs.
50% of all classics in the country right now are Mercedes.
The prices seem to be super heated. So for someone getting into it, you really need to have a lot of money.
Japanese cars are super reliable. And at the same time, I think after the last few series of Fast and Furious movies, everyone wants a Japanese sports car. Who ever thought that, these modern classics would
Cost
really...
more than a Rolls.
10 times more than a thoroughbred classic Rolls or things like that.
Our annual Mercedes-Benz Classic Car Rally has just finished and it was a monumental success. In fact, it's growing bigger and better each year. And we thought that why not talk about this new craze for classic cars on our latest podcast, Deep Drive, brought to you by Kotak Mahindra Prime. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee and we have a special guest. We have Perseus Bandrawalla, who is our go-to man for anything classic. He's been the curator of the Mercedes-Benz Classic Car Rally for the last 11 years. And I think anyone who knows him in this community knows he's the guy who has even chassis numbers at the tip of his fingers. Perseus, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Hormazd. Thank you for having me. It's my first podcast.
Yeah. So don't be too nervous. It's all very cool, very conversational. So relax.
Cool.
So just have a what do I say? A big 3-pointer in front of you, and you'll be cool.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, Perseus, just starting off with, I think let's first, for our listeners, viewers, have the definition between what is a vintage and what is a classic. And even now moving to a modern classic, which of course we've done a lot of events for those.
So Hormazd, largely, but a lot of clubs have a different sort of definition for what is a classic or a modern classic. But what is largely vintage today, I mean, at least for the Gen Z and the millennials, is anything that is pre-World War II. So that is considered as vintage. And then anything that is post-World War II, right until the 70s, is definitely a full-fledged classic.
So 1945 is the cutoff, or is it 48, 49, or what is it?
See, a lot of cars like the 170V, for example, were manufactured pre-war and then they were also manufactured post-war. So I would say anything that's pre-50s would be vintage, largely. And then after that would be a classic. Again, some say that a classic, for some people, a classic is something that is till 1970s. But largely now, a lot of international bodies like the FIFA say anything that is up to 30 years old, older than 30 years old, is a full-fledged classic, and then come the modern classics.
So the modern classic, let's talk about them. We've had a couple of modern classic rallies. We've talked a lot about these. Cars which are really quite popular and frankly quite usable. Right. You can even drive them with aircons on. So, it's not even a pain to drive them as, let's say, a vintage or an older classic would be. This is really seems to be the hot new kind of, trend right now.
Absolutely. So I think nothing beats a modern classic in terms of, being usable and you can really enjoy it every day. Some manufacturers, like, for example, Porsche, now have an aftermarket original infotainment system, which is a DIN1 system for a 996, for example, which actually even has Apple CarPlay. So this actually highlights how usable modern classics are, and some manufacturers are even supporting things like Apple CarPlay in an old car. And it's the same with the older German cars. Anything which has a DIN2, an old Mercedes, an old BMW, you can always have a DIN2 music infotainment system with your reversing camera, with a...
but doesn't that take away from what it... you never had this earlier, right. So it kind of takes away from the originality. Yeah?
So honestly, for someone like me who's a purist, I do not like adding a screen to a car.
Yeah.
But a lot of modern classics have a lot of other parking aids, like, parking sensors, or even some really cool cars like the 140, which have the antenna which goes up for parking aids. I think those are...
W140, which is the...
W140 S-Class.
Okay, sorry.
So, the Mercedes S-Class, the W140, generation had these antennas that went up when you reversed.
In fact, it was the first car with a CAN system as well.
And those are the things that we love. And of course, if you have a dot matrix screen, which is original to the car, I don't think anything looks cooler than that in this day and age, because it really gives it a Nintendo video game feel. But it just looks awesome. It's period correct. And a screen is a screen. It reads out a message. So I think that's all you need to.
Perseus, coming back to, let's say, the Mercedes-Benz Classic Car Rally, or MBCCR as we know it, this year we had about 60 new cars making their debuts. I mean, that's crazy. I want to know, where are people finding these cars, and they're restoring them.
Right.
And, how is this, how is the community, or let's say the vehicle park of these classic cars growing so much?
So, Hormazd, when we started Mercedes-Benz Classic Car Rally in 2014, it was called the 120 Years of Motorsport. But I remember at that time we had 60 cars that took part and a database of about 90 cars from all across the country. This year, our database crossed 930 cars only in Mercedes-Benz.
But where are they finding these cars? Where are they coming out?
So, a lot of cars are coming out of the dead. So, for example, there were two amazing Fintail Mercedes W111 that Mr. Goenka debuted at the show. Now, I remember visiting those cars and seeing those cars at Mr. Goenka's workshop in 2022. And you wouldn't, if I showed you pictures of those cars, you wouldn't even believe it that it's a car. I mean, you can see the Fintails, but then everything was just, something, a pile of metal that was not touched for 30 years. And then you actually see now two cars which look exactly like they've come out of the showroom or have come out of the factory.
So clearly restoration is restoration. We'll come to the restoration part of it, but again, I want to talk to you. Are you seeing more and more enthusiasts getting into the classic car fold, picking up their first classics to start a collection? Obviously requires a lot of commitment, or do some of them just buy it because it's a cool thing to have? Obviously, events like this are driving people to pick up cars. And so who's buying these cars?
So every time we have an event, like for example, after yesterday's event, I'm getting phone calls since morning saying, find me a classic car because I want to be a part of this event. And the great thing about Mumbai is that Mumbai is the epicenter of the classic car world in India. No city in India beats Mumbai when it comes to the classic car scene. Every Sunday, we have multiple groups doing multiple drives. So again, yes, a lot of people want to drive, want to be a part of the car community, and they buy cars. And it's most of the times, I would say almost 80% of the time, the first car is now a modern classic.
Yeah.
And for example, the Mercedes-Benz W124, it's an absolute backbone model, a W124 or a W123. It's the go-to first car for.
But in fact, Mercedes as a brand is the backbone of the classic car movement in India. I mean, what would be the percentage of out of all the classics? Is it fair to say Mercedes would be 40-50%?
Yeah, easily 50% as of now.
Of all classics are Mercs.
50% of all classics in the country right now are Mercedes. And even the large collectors who 10 years ago, there were a lot of large collectors in India who had a lot of cars. They had 30, 40 cars and they did not have Mercedes-Benz cars. But today we can see that they have almost 5 or 10 Mercedes-Benz in a collection of 30 or 40 cars. So that really shows you the popularity of the brand that has grown.
And why is it? Is it because Mercedes is the oldest car manufacturer in the world? Probably that would be it. And I think Mercedes also supports the classic car movement with spare parts, with know-how. I think the parts are the most freely available.
Right. So I keep saying it that it's the easiest brand in the world to maintain as a classic car. Of course, there are issues. We do not have parts for some models, certain parts. But when you compare it to any other brand in the world, it's a breeze to maintain a Mercedes-Benz. And also the longevity of these cars. I mean, you can see that we have so many participants who drive down from all over the country, 27 just yesterday. And 8 or 9 of them have done 3,000 kilometer road trips in cars which are 35, 40 years old, and it's not a problem at all. So that again, it gives a lot of confidence to first time classic car collectors, as well as it gives a lot of confidence to people who are investing in these cars that it won't let me down. It'll run, and I want a reliable classic.
Right. And, looking at the different marks, clearly there are a lot of marks with a lot of history and heritage. You've got Jaguar,
Right.
you've got the old Fords,
Yep.
Chevys, and even BMWs. And I mean, talking about BMW, I mean, you and I, we both have a E30 325i, one of its kind, absolute jewel of a car,
Right.
but a nightmare to kind of maintain because I think BMW just do not support classic car owner, and that's quite a shame.
Yeah, I mean, for example, even things like a fuel tank or certain parts which you have to change in a car after 35 years or after 25 years, there is just absolutely no parts available. Authorized dealers say they have no spare parts. And there's very, very, very little support from authorized dealers for classic cars with BMW or other brands. I remember when I had an issue with an E46, it was an absolutely spanking condition car. It had a small issue, electrical issue, and I remember being told that why don't you exchange it for a new car? And it really upset me when they said that to me.
Yeah. But I think that's really a shame because they have a heritage and surprising and really sad that BMW don't really invest in the classic car space the way, let's say,
Yeah.
Mercedes has. Audi, of course, don't have that same heritage in that way. I mean, they don't have the cars over here.
Right.
Of course, I think the most famous is Ravi Shastri's Audi 100, which really is the most famous Audi in India. And obviously, that's come a lot to our shows.
Right.
But just looking at brands, Perseus, if I was to get into, let's say, wanting to become a classic car collector, have a reasonable budget.
Right.
I mean, do you need a lot of money? I mean, what's the sort of, let's say, easy entry to get on the ladder?
So again, the de facto car in the India market or even globally right now is to enter classic car ownership with a Mercedes-Benz W123 or a W124. Again, prices have just soared. So
just give us a sense of the prices. I mean, let's say the kind of, let's say, escalation over the last year. Let's say from COVID, because that seems to be a starting point for everything now.
So I would say, I mean, for example, a very popular model like a W123 or a W124.
How much was it 4-5 years back?
They were about, they started at about 3 lakh rupees for a decent running car.
When?
During the COVID years, put it that way. And just this year at the rally, you saw that there were cars which are bought for 6 lakhs, 7 lakhs, and owners have spent 14 lakhs, 15 lakhs, 18 lakhs on restoring them.
So, 123.
On a W124.
124.
So the sum total of the car plus restoration is far exceeds what the car costed in India in 1996. So that really shows you that there has been a lot of demand for these cars, a lot of spare parts availability. But then there are also some other cars, like, for example, American cars. And if you want a car from the 50s, 60s, 70s, then American cars are also relatively easy to maintain because there is a lot of aftermarket spare parts that are available in the US.
Yeah, the whole kind of cottage industry.
Yeah, it's a cottage industry over there. So you can buy parts for American cars. I believe you can even buy body panels for some American cars which are popular. And they're relatively easy. But again, there's no manufacturer support in that.
And what about in terms of if I want to buy one, how much will it cost? What's a typical, price? I mean, obviously not as freely available as a 124 in India. That's the first Mercedes we made. So let's say even the telco built 124 they are there in the market. A couple of thousand made, not too many, or maybe I think there's 1,500 made. But what about American cars? I mean, is there easy to pick up one?
It is relatively easy to pick up one, and the pricing is very elastic. So I would say you can buy an American, say a Dodge Kingsway for as little as 5 lakhs, or you can even.
Really? I had a Dodge Kingsway. I mean, we had it as a family car.
Yeah.
But we sold it off. I learned to drive on it.
Yeah. So like I said, it's elastic if it's a non-runner, but it has.
The Kingsway is just 5 lakhs.
I mean, if it's a non-running car, but has all the trim in its place,
and then to restore it would cost how much?
It would cost anything from another 5 lakhs to 20 lakhs.
You got me thinking to try and find a part of my childhood back here.
But so it's very elastic. Like I said, it all depends on the car, the provenance, the previous restoration, the history of the car. And again, the way it drives, I mean, if you feel that it's mechanically strong and it just needs a cosmetic job, then you can.
So what you're saying is you could get something like Dodge Kingsway for a 5 lakhs, and you could
You have to
find
build
the
it.
parts
You have to build it.
and you have to build it.
Yeah, but parts are available.
Right. Okay. And what about, let's say, Volkswagens, for example? The Beetle, of course,
Yeah.
is everyone's favorite. You had special, Volkswagen rallies, most of them Beetles, very few non-Beetles left, a few Siroccos. In fact, I had a Sirocco in the early 80s, and I'd love to find that car again.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So very rare car. A few Golfs, the small vans and the buses, mini buses, and also I had minivans. But what from Volkswagen also, they've got quite a heritage, isn't it?
Right. So Volkswagens are, I mean, Beetles are again extremely easy to maintain. Again, we don't have authorized dealers supporting,
But you can get the parts.
but the parts are available because, world's best selling car at one time.
The
So
volume of it is
again, cottage industry just supporting spare parts. Very few mechanical parts for an air-cooled engine.
yeah.
So relatively easy to maintain. Again, it's probably the cheapest coupe you can buy in a classic car segment. So 2-door. So there is a demand. We've seen Beetle prices again from anything running cars for about 10 lakhs to about 15, 18 lakhs is what I've seen.
So basically nothing, whether you want to get something running, you're looking at a minimum investment of about, for some of these cars, 20, 25 lakhs.
I would say 10 lakhs to start with for a running car.
Right. Okay.
And then obviously you build on it. And what I tell those who want to buy a car for the first time is, I always say, buy a car which is mechanically strong.
Yeah.
And the cosmetics can always be done. And then you learn the ropes when you order parts and fit them. And, especially
Mechanical and engine as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically, I mean, engine, suspension, gearbox. Gearboxes is a weak link in India because we don't have too many experts who can fix gearboxes.
Yeah.
We have a few engine experts.
Right.
We have a few guys who do gearboxes.
Yeah.
But
it's a high precision, let's say, item, and really to open it up and put it back together.
Right. That's an issue. But again, I have seen over the last few years a lot of specialists who've come in who even rebuild clutches and things now in India.
Yeah.
Which is nice to see, and there's a lot of demand.
Yeah. And then let's say supercars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, there's some old Ferraris, obviously very, very difficult to maintain. Porsches we've seen, I don't know how far they go. I believe there's a 964, but not seen it. I think some 993s, but I don't know if it goes back, before that. So really these cars have not had a strong legacy, and they've been, these brands have come late to India. So clearly you don't have, a lot of historic cars, but, just give us a sense of the real exotic.
So I think the exotics, Ferrari has something called Ferrari Classiche, and they do support internationally, and they do support older Ferraris with spare parts, with discounts.
So crazy expensive.
But of course, it's expensive. The numbers are very few in India, and but I believe that you can get some spare parts for them. Porsche is also relatively easy. As you know, my first car was a 944.
Yeah.
And
where is that car now?
It's with one collector in Bangalore who has almost every front engine Porsche, classic Porsche. So again, it's not too difficult. We have spare parts, have websites like Pelican Parts or FCP Euro, which are America based, but they're very, very good with spare parts. And now with electronic spare part catalogs coming in, where you have a lot of third party sites where you enter your VIN number and then you're actually sitting on a electronic spare part catalog, just like you would in an authorized dealership. And then it's quite easy to find the part number and then look it up and then order it. There are a lot of other European websites. There are some, but most of them are American websites. I think Spare2 is another very big popular website which a lot of people use.
Right.
So I think European cars in general, Porsches, Mercedes, to some extent you get BMW parts on these websites also, but you get a lot of parts for.
Right. So basically what you're saying is Mercedes and a lot of American cars, the easiest to get parts for.
Right. I would say, again, even from the German brands, Mercedes is the easiest because they have a full-fledged classic center.
Right.
So that really helps also.
And Volkswagen, fundamentally, the Beetle by the sheer number of cars that over decades have been produced in millions.
And like you said, cottage industries supporting Beetle parts.
Let's talk about some of the Japanese cars, because Japanese you don't really associate too much with classic, but there's some legendary cars.
Yes.
I mean, one of my favorites is the Honda NSX, more modern classic kind of cars, really not very old classic, because obviously their industry started largely after the war.
Yes.
So Japanese cars, a lot of these JDM models, or Japanese domestic market models, obviously they have quite an appeal because very quirky kind of cars.
Yeah.
Remember, we had the Suzuki Cappuccino. I don't know if it's still around, but it's quite a...
Yes. We have one one should debut at our modern classic.
Talk to me about the Japanese cars and how easy are they to maintain? Typically, imagine Japanese cars to be super reliable.
Yeah, Japanese cars are super reliable, and at the same time, I think after the last few series of Fast and Furious movies, everyone wants a Japanese sports car.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of popularity, they're right up there.
Yeah. So what about the MR2, Supercars,
the MR2s, the Supercars, the NSXs? Again, difficult to get spare parts for Japanese cars.
You're telling me, I've got my good old Suzuki SS80, impossible to...
Again, I think I keep laughing about it that the SS80 is probably the most difficult car to maintain because you have absolutely no support and no spare parts. I mean, whatever you can find online on eBay is the best that you can get.
Probably Mercedes is easier to maintain than my little Maruti.
And also probably cheaper for certain rims and things.
Yeah.
But I think cars like the NSX have just, the values have gone through the roof globally, just not in India, but globally. And also they're very reliable and again, very usable.
Right.
So cars like the MX-5 Gen 1 and a lot of 1.6 liter MX-5s in India, Mazda Miatas, and they're absolutely lovely to have, extremely, extremely reliable. And again, spare parts are available for this by the sheer popularity of the car globally.
Right. Yeah.
You don't get it easily, but you can manage to find, and a lot of cannibalization also happens. So a lot of car breakers have come across, especially on the internet. And you will see that they break cars which have had an accident or have a blown engine, and then
they cannibalize them for parts.
Yeah, they sell a lot of parts online, and it's easy to get parts, and also you get a lot of new parts for these Japanese cars.
Right. And let's talk about restoration, because I think either that's part of the joy and the pain of owning a classic car.
The most exciting parts.
I mean, I don't know how you do it, but our BMW E30, it's just never running 100% all the time, because always something or the other wrong.
Right.
And really frustrating with no lack of. So it can be frustrating, but when it runs, it gives a certain joy.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly,
makes it worth it.
The analog feel of these cars, especially in this digital age, electric age, I think, you really, it always puts a smile on your face there. So, and I think maybe that's what's driving demand also. Don't you think that's what it is? Because, in this whole EV age, a lot of the ICE cars are going, and I think people want to have a slice of that history.
Even naturally aspirated is getting more popular again.
Exactly.
After that slight lull where people wanted turbo for more power.
That's right.
People appreciate naturally aspirated cars, and they want to buy naturally aspirated cars. And again, the straight sixes the prices are going through the roof. People are ready to pay the penalty of not having parts available.
You mean the BM straight?
Or BMWs, yeah.
The naturally aspirated.
Yeah,
like ours.
But there are a handful of them in the country. So the lovers of the car don't mind a little bit of sacrifice and, taking that extra pain of getting parts. But largely, I think the 4-cylinder car values are not so strong. For example, an equivalent Mercedes would be way higher than a BMW.
I think today it's all about the number of cylinders. Look at the F80 or V6 for that price. Obviously, people are questioning it.
Right.
So the Ferrari F80. So I think obviously V8s are, it's just, I think they're becoming extinct.
Yeah.
And
high revving naturally aspirated cars like the S2000.
Yeah.
Globally they're becoming sensations.
Right.
And in India, we know about 2 cars. And I know a lot of people who are ready to give an arm and a leg to have an S2000. Again, you can import a car which is pre-1950 into India.
Yeah.
But you just can't import anything that is post 1950.
So which makes them more rare. So you have to get whatever is available here.
Absolutely. And that is driving up the prices. And also globally, Hormaz, the prices of cars from the 70s, 80s, and 90s are, at one time, they were growing faster than the thoroughbred classic car prices. But today, they have far exceeded the prices. So, for example, you can buy a gurney nutting Rolls Royce for $200,000, for example. But I was shocked that a CLK GTR at a recent auction,
Mercedes, huh?
yeah, Mercedes CLK GTR was, I think, $13 million, you know. And I mean, look at Ferrari F40s and the Lamborghini Countaches. They're all multi-million-dollar cars.
Right.
And who ever thought that, you know, these modern classics would
Cost
really
more than a Rolls.
10 times more than a thoroughbred
Vintage
classic
goods.
Rolls or
Yeah.
things like that. So I think the millennials, the Gen Z, they all want to get into naturally aspirated, nice, fun to drive modern classics. And I think that is really, I mean, that's the toast of the entire community right now, globally and even in India. I
Right.
think that's something we've started with the Mercedes rally,
Right. Absolutely.
which has really now given birth to modern classics
Yeah.
as a
Absolutely.
brand. Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit on, firstly, how do I've got a car. It's not in good shape.
Right.
Let's take an example of you mentioned earlier, Dodge Kingsway.
Right.
5-6 lakhs, I've got it. How do I go about restoring? Who do I give it to? Who are the restorers in the country? Let's get some,
So
let's say,
there are
sense of that.
So I would say that we have the A plus restorers who can do a restoration which is as good as the best in the world. So, for example, from a cosmetics point of view, not a mechanical restoration, but from a pure coachwork cosmetics point of view, you have Mr. Vivek Goenka, you have Marispan Dada Chanji. They are right up there.
Right.
And then you also have Supercar Garage, who's doing a lot of good work with the modern classics. Recently they've restored a R107, I believe. It's come out phenomenally. Mercedes-Benz. They do a lot of modern classics. They're phenomenally good. We have some not upcoming. We have some young restorers who've started about 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, like Jatin Patel from Wagon Works, who's doing a phenomenal job. And I think every city, every state has a number of them. We have the Lathia brothers in Rajkot who do a phenomenal job. We have Abhijit Patil, who's a Mercedes specialist in Kolhapur. I think he's restored over 70 cars over the last few years. He's been telling me about it. So we have a lot of guys. We have Srivardhan Kanoria up in Calcutta who's doing a phenomenal job with old Rolls Royces. And these are just a few.
Yeah. And a lot of the owners become restorers themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Vivek Goenka is one of them.
absolutely. So,
I think Gautam Singhania with Supercar Garage.
yeah.
And Diljit Titus also.
Titus also. Even Madan Mohan has started his own.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is great. But mechanically, we don't have a very strong... we don't have restorers who do a very large mechanical restoration for engines, transmissions, like I said.
Yeah.
We have
Very cosmetic. They are very, very good.
cosmetics were right up there with anywhere in the world. We have a few engine specialists in Bombay, and Christopher in Bangalore is great.
Right.
But largely for the big engine jobs, you have to really get a consultant. I mean, I was fortunate enough to visit PNA Woods 2 months ago in England. And the way in which they go about with just restoring engines for Rolls-Royce and Bentleys and transmissions.
Yeah.
I mean, they purr like they've just come out of the factory.
Wow.
And I think that is something that India really needs to catch up on the mechanical side of restoration of cars.
Right. And let's talk about some of the collectors. Lots of collectors around. I mean, just to name some of them. Quite a lot.
Again, we have a whole ton of collectors. We have the Goenka collection. We have Gautam's collection in Bombay. We have Mr. Titus. We have Madan Mohan in Delhi. Down south, we have Ranjit Pratap. We have a lot of collectors in Bangalore, right, who are quite large. We have Himanshu, of course, who's collecting cars. But the most exciting thing for me is after Modern Classic Rally, we have a lot of modern classic car collectors. For example, Joey Postel.
Right.
I believe he's built a collection of about 180 cars since the first Modern Classic Rally in 2021. And really, he is bought almost every type or every uh, JDM car, as well as an off-roaders like the Land Rovers, Land Cruisers. And I think he has a phenomenal collection. The same with Pratap Gaikwad. He has built a phenomenal collection of cars which are all modern classics. So he has a few classics because they're family heirlooms, but his personal collection are all modern classics. And as you saw, he built that Carlson replica and brought to our show. And that just shows you the enthusiasm that there is for modern classics.
Right.
And I think there's Johan Punawala, who has probably the best collection of Ferraris and old Rolls Royces in India. Again, it's a curated collection, but it's a fantastic collection if you have to make a museum around it.
And I think Johan sends a fair amount of his cars abroad as well, doesn't he, for restoration?
So he's doing a lot of cosmetic work with Mr. Goenka and Allen, but I believe he's also sending a lot of cars abroad right now because some of his cars really deserve that treatment, and he's getting some of his cars restored abroad.
And clearly the mechanical work, as you said,
Happens in
best happens. India's really not got
not
that
up to
expertise.
standard, but the cosmetics can happen here.
And how can we forget the Pranlal Bhogilal collection, a collection I've grown up seeing. It's got some of the greatest cars and probably is one collection with the best provenance. I just want to get a sense of prices again, because I think when we were chatting at the MBCCR and looking at the cars, you said must be at least 200 crores worth of cars overall.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what would you say today is the most valuable car if it were to be sold in India? Is it
It would definitely be a Mercedes-Benz.
right?
I mean, the world's most valuable car is also a Mercedes-Benz.
Right.
But yeah, I think I have seen.
What are these 500Ks go for example?
So, I mean, there hasn't been a exchange of a 500K or a supercharged car.
Right.
But again, they would be exceeding, it would start 7 or 8 crores of rupees. And I don't think any other car in India has exchanged hands at prices that I'm seeing for just modern classic Mercedes. For example, we know that a SEC, which is a Mercedes-Benz S-Class Coupe, W126,
one of Bruno Sacco's
favorite cars. We know that one car was sold for close to 1 crore. Wow. But then a few months later, another one was sold for more than 1 crore. So when we thought it's an abnormality for it to sell for that price, it's actually the price of the car. Again, we've seen R129 SLs, the 1980s, 1990s SL. When we know one car was sold upwards of 50 lakh rupees, and then bang, I get to know that 2 more cars have sold, of course, 500s, but for 70 lakhs and upwards.
Right.
So it's no longer an abnormality. It's just the fact that these
What
cars...
about the Gullwing SLS? Because clearly that's also becoming a classic.
Absolutely. I believe that
and that was actually sold in India.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, when the market prices were at an all-time low, during COVID again, they had touched as low as about 1 crore of rupees. But a little birdie tells me that one car just exchanged hands for upwards of 3 crores of rupees, which I think is higher than what they costed when new. But again, the SLS is a global sensation. Everyone all over the world wants to collect one. Iconic design, the last naturally aspirated 6.3. So again, supercar and super prices, I would say.
Right. And Perseus, again, looking at in India also, obviously the movement growing. One sad part is Delhi, which I think at one point was quite a hub. I mean, they used to have multiple rallies, especially lovely season in winter.
Yes.
Perfect time to have old vintage and classic cars, parading down the streets. All gone, killed by NGT. And rather unreasonably so, because clearly, I think... these are classic cars. There could have been some exemption for them.
Right.
Simple exemption would be at least allow them to ply on weekends, and even on weekdays if you have to transport them, after 8 in the evening or before 6 in the morning. Because clearly if you put those restrictions, they're not used as an everyday car. So they won't pollute like a really typical old car would. They'd only be there for occasional use. But I believe there's been no kind of, let's say, leeway given to them. They're just treated as any other old car, which means they're polluting and they should be off the road. And I believe some owners have even had their cars confiscated.
Right. So, Hormaz, the unfortunate thing about the NGT ruling is that the rule says that anything over 15 years old, which is petrol, had to be scrapped. With a lot of effort of Mr. Goenka, Mr. Titus, and the Delhi Motoring Club, they have been able to get some sort of relief. But I believe the relief is for cars which are older than 50 years, or pre 1970 largely, where you can get some sort of concession with a uh, permission to ply on roads on certain days for rallies, etc.
Right.
But I believe what has happened is that there is no concession as such for modern classics or cars which are less than 50 years old, but
Right.
older than 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I think that has really killed the market. It's killed the enthusiasm. I know of some people who have complained because they have parked their cars right outside their house. They're not using it, and they've just been picked up and impounded because it's presumed that they're going to use it, which is not fair.
Correct.
And as a result of that, Delhi has no modern classic or classic post the 70s left in Delhi.
Right.
Unless it's in a museum, they don't let you, literally don't let you park your car outside the road.
That's a shame. I think that we're lucky that
Yeah.
in Mumbai, there's a thriving community, and obviously all roads are leading to Mumbai for classic cars, and we saw that at the Mercedes rally where you had guys from all over coming from Kochi, Kolhapur, all over, just
Lucknow and
even Lucknow,
Kozhikode,
yeah,
which is quite amazing.
amazing. Yeah. So I think, but clearly, we just want to wrap up. Been quite interesting is that uh, the prices seem to be superheated. So for someone getting into it, you really need to have a lot of money.
But Hormaz, I wouldn't say that, because today an average entry level SUV is also 15 or 16 lakh of rupees.
Right.
So I personally see a lot more value in buying a modern classic like a W123 and building it, because you definitely won't lose money on that.
Right.
Or on an old Mercedes or something like that, because it definitely is going to appreciate. I mean, I remember last year we sold a car at our W123 E-Class for 13 lakh of rupees just before our rally.
Auction it, I think.
It was a sort of a deal that we helped with.
Right.
And we thought it was like a record price. And today, I believe the value of that exact same car is upwards of about 15, 18, or even 20 lakh of rupees.
My God, in just 1 year.
In just 1 year. So it shows you how these cars are really appreciating. And I just see them going higher and higher. So I don't think it's a bad investment, because you're enjoying it as well as the car appreciates. So it's a great investment, in my opinion, even at any price.
Right. Well, I think that's we'll end on that. Classic cars, a great investment. The craze for classic cars is growing. That's what's driving the demand for them. That's what's driving up their prices. But I think the really good thing is that love affair with cars, it's just, going across generations. People love their new cars. We've seen that, but now people are loving old cars as well. So I think finally we are getting a car community and a car culture in India. And really, it's a lot of these classic cars driving it. Well, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of Deep Drive. Don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 11 a.m. And you can even hear us on Spotify and Apple Podcast. See you again next week, same time.